What's going on, wrestling fans? It is I, Steve Fall, and welcome to 10 Count. On today's edition, I am talking to one of my favorite superstars of all time. It's Duke the Dumpster Droese. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show, man. I'm looking forward to this.
I am so pumped right now. I don't have a trash can with me, but it's incredible that in today's world, I have seen you pop up in random organizations, and that got my mind blown because it felt like we didn't see you for so long. Now, why suddenly are you coming forth in wrestling once again on different programs on TV?
Because I'm a sucker, I guess. I can't say no. No, promoters call me and talk to me about possibility of doing things. I really can't wrestle per se, but I can go out to the ring and slam somebody in the head with a garbage can, pretty much. And I do that from time to time, and I do appearances and autograph signings and stuff like that with a lot of the other old guys, and we just kind of take it as an opportunity to get back together and catch up. This past weekend, I was up in Canton, Ohio, and I got to see my old friend Savio Vega for the first
Oh,
time in
man.
many years. So it was great to see him, and it's just great to get out there and kind of meet with the fans, especially the newer fans. There's a lot of younger people that seem to be looking back on our era in a nostalgic way, and it's great because we're getting a whole new set of fans.
It's true because for so long as I was a kid, I got into wrestling going to a Blockbuster or a video store and I'd watch Warrior and Hogan and Savage. But I grew up with the new generation of the WWF superstars, including yourself and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Savio Vega, another person I interviewed twice recently, and he's a wonderful human being. So let's
Yes.
tell your tale. In 1994, you came to the WWF at the time, put the F back in for now. Now, how did this deal come to be?
Well, interestingly, I was finishing college down in Miami, Florida. I grew up down in Miami, and I was already a pro wrestler. I had started pro wrestling. I was still in high school when I started pro wrestling, but I had put together a promotional package, basically a videotape and a resume and some pictures and stuff. And I was going to the plan was I was going to go all over the country and try to get a job somewhere at one of the last remaining, territories.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is I was reading in the paper a story about Hulk Hogan jumping to WCW and the whole steroid scandal, which was going on at the time. And it turned out they were talking to him at a convention, a NatP convention, which is TV executives, where basically people with networks or shows go to sell their shows to networks and executives and stuff. And they have all these bigwigs meet up. Anyway, turned out Vince McMahon was also in attendance at this thing, and it was at the Miami Beach Convention Center right next to where I lived. It was really close. And so I had all these promo packages already made. And what I ended up doing is I found a friend of mine who was an executive at a local TV station,
Wow.
and he gave me his credentials. And I just walked into that place like I was an executive from Channel 2
Oh my
Miami.
God.
And I walked right up to Vince McMahon and shook his hand and told him who I was and why I was there and gave him a promotional package. And, he asked me a couple of questions and then I got the hell out of there. But that's how it started. And they called me a week later for a tryout.
So when you shook Vince McMahon's hand, did you explain, hey, by the way, I snuck in here with my friend's credentials? Oh, okay. Because maybe
No, but it was
he
funny
might take
because he
balls.
looked, he was like, hey, and then he just kind of looked at me like he was trying to figure it out. And then when I started talking, he realized, oh, this guy's here to sell himself.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because, I had a friend that it all came together basically overnight. And the day before, when I found out he was there, I was saying, I'm going to this thing. And one of my friends said, if you catch him by himself, you better jump because he won't be alone for long. And sure enough, 10 a.m., he was having his first cup of coffee by himself, and all the other people were milling around on the other side. And I just made a beeline right for him. And yeah, just pitched him, and that was it.
Wow. Because you think of today's world of like walking up to say Vince McMahon in the airport or Triple H or Tony Khan or people like that. I can't imagine it going sour pretty quick because everyone has probably heard a story like yours and suddenly they're like, okay, I'll do the same exact thing. And before there was internet, to share your story over and over again, here we are sharing it now. But people have probably heard this version a couple times. It's incredible that you were able to catch him, boom, and suddenly you're with the company. So now you show up in the company, and now you're talking to Vince McMahon. Now I'm guessing in Stamford, Connecticut. And what is he pitching? What is his ideas? Because he sees, you just mentioned, he sees how tall you are, how big you are. What's he pitching to you?
Well, the great thing about it is I was already wrestling with the Garbage Man gimmick down in Florida. I was wrestling as the Garbage Man Rocco Gibraltar. And so I had a ready-made gimmick, and I had kind of planned it that way. I knew it would interest him at the very least. And sure enough, it did. It was just, all he did was have to change the name so he could own the licensing to it. But he loved it, and they went with what I was already doing, and they just changed the name.
Wow. And then, of course, you shot those vignettes of just showcasing how you're, a trash man, a garbage man. And who came up with these? Because I know many, many superstars have come in with these, and they're like classic. They're in our brains forever. So who came up with yours?
It Shane McMahon. Me and Shane did them all together. We went riding around Stamford, Connecticut all day and shot these vignettes at the dump and on the back of a garbage truck. He was working in the studio at the time. At that point, he was kind of working in every different facet of the company, kind of one by one, because he was obviously going to be the heir apparent to take over one day. That was the plan, I think, back then. And I think he was just out of college. He was maybe 22, 23 years old. And we sat down. He told me the name. He told me some ideas he had. I told him some ideas I had, and we made it work. We just kind of put these vignettes together, and it was pretty funny. I think the way we did it. Well, that was a real garbage truck in the middle of its route in Stamford, Connecticut. That I guess he set it up or something, but we just met up with them out in front of a house they were picking up garbage at, and we just started riding with them and doing vignettes in between them picking up trash cans.
That's amazing. It just sounds like Shane's like, listen, I think I know these people. And if I don't know them, we'll somehow work out a deal where you can just ride this trash truck around and cut
Yeah,
promos.
they were cool with it. Yeah, and then we went to the dump, and I climbed up in a huge pile of garbage, and they were cool with it. And yeah, he had great ideas.
Wow. And now, are you writing things out or you're just spitballing what's coming to your brain?
I've a little bit of both. I think I wrote a few kind of a little bit of verbiage for promos, maybe on the plane trip up there. And then he had some ideas, and he looked at mine and plugged them into his planned vignettes and stuff, and we just kind of put it all together. And while we were out there, we threw in we kind of thought of some stuff on the fly, so it just kind of came together that way.
Wow. Yeah. And it's interesting because Shane McMahon, you're right. He's probably like 22 years old at the time you're filming these. And this must be maybe a slight test by Vince saying, all right, I'll send my son out with, Duke the Dump to Droese and see how these come out. And obviously they came out great because when you came in, everyone was super excited to see you, come into the ring and your character. Just your gimmick alone really spoke to people because for a long time we did have occupations as gimmicks. You had the IRS man who's in the tax guy. You had the dentist, but I think, is a little different because you came in, with the trash can with a gimmick kind of already packaged and made for them, which I bet they loved, of course. But what are your first impressions walking in to this WWF locker room with stars like Diesel and Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, Million Dollar Man, Undertaker?
Yeah, I mean, I was marked out to say the least. It was these guys that I watched when I was coming up into the business myself, and some of them I watched when I was younger, almost as a kid even. And it was just an interesting transition to get out of fanboy mode and get into, wrestler mode and realize I was one of them, and these were my peers now, and I had to put on my A game and be ready to go. Otherwise, it wasn't going to last long.
My God. And then, of course, Vince McMahon, when he suddenly is seeing you in the ring with this character, is he giving you pointers? Is he saying, man, do this, try that? Because obviously, first impressions walking into the locker room, you're saying, I would have done the same thing. You're fanboying out a little bit, and you're like, wait. These are my peers now here at work, and now Vince McMahon's my boss. So, like,
Yeah.
what's that situation like? Because he must be hands on.
Vince was always very cool with me. He was always willing to talk and listen. And I remember at one point he kind of told me that his vision for that character was kind of like a cross between Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Hillbilly Jim.
Yeah.
And he was talking to me like I didn't know who they were, and I'm going, I know exactly who they are. I know, you know. But that was the kind of thing he would talk to me about. You know, those were the ideas, and it was always great collaboration. He was always willing to sit down and listen. You know.
Yeah. And did you ever actually hang out with Vince McMahon? Because I know there's always stories of parties at his house. Were there ever interactions with you and Vince outside of work?
No, not really. No, I mean we maybe were hanging out in the same bar a couple times. I remember one time I was hanging out with Bret Hart and Vince was there at a different table with Shawn Michaels and they were talking over whatever, but we were just kind of hanging out. I mean, but I didn't, I didn't want to bother him outside of work. I was like, I'm not just going to walk up to him and say, hey, I mean, I may have walked up, shook his hand and said hello, but then left him alone.
Yeah. You didn't have your fake badge on anymore. You're an employee. You had to kind of fall in line. I imagine it being a little weird. Like, oh, here I am with Bret Hart, but there's Vince with Shawn Michaels. Like, do I interrupt this conversation? Do I come over?
Yeah, I thought better of it.
Hmm.
I wasn't going to interrupt that conversation.
Smart, smart. Because were there ever discussions of you ever? Because your character came in, huge momentum, had great run in general. But like, were there ever discussions? Because some people who came in immediately became like Wildman Mark Marrow, who used to be Johnny B. Bad in WCW, came in, won the IC championship. Ahmed Johnson came in, won the Intercontinental Championship. Golda, same thing. Like these are people from different places coming here. Was there ever discussion say, okay, we like what you're doing, but we're going to actually level you up a little bit?
No, we never talked about any like intercontinental runs or anything like that. It was just kind of, I was letting them dictate, completely where the character went and where the storylines went, which later on I would realize was a mistake. I should have been much more hands-on and even in some cases more demanding about storyline ideas, at least have more creative ideas to add to the pot and not be completely reliant on their ideas because at one point, I guess they kind of dried up and they changed their thoughts on what they were doing with me or whatever. And it's then I started talking about wanting to be a heel, which was a little bit later on, but it never really materialized. We talked about it and tried it a little bit, but then it just kind of fell apart.
Right. So you kind of said it. So you believe there were mistakes there where you just allowed the company to dictate what you were doing versus you stepping in and going, I don't like this. I do like this, but we should tweak it out a little bit like that.
Well, one thing is you realize, I mean, there's haves and have-nots. There were people that were getting a push. There was people that were not getting a push, and to sit back and observe how all this went down, there was a lot of guys that would sit around bitter and angry and bitching and moaning all the time, and I always thought that was kind of weird, but later on, I kind of became one of those people. I got
Mm.
bitter and I was like, they should be pushing me better than this. But the reality is, to some extent, you have the ability to get yourself over. All you need to do is get Vince to agree to put you on live TV at some point, and then it's game on. You got to do something that's going to get you over with the crowd and with the fans, and if you don't understand that, which I did not early on, if you don't understand that one important factor, then you're just going to be sitting there kind of twiddling your thumbs and hoping for the best. And that's not the best way to go about the wrestling business, is hoping for the best. You got to make things happen.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of discussions over the years, even shoot interviews with wrestlers who were around exactly when you were around, and they're very bitter towards Shawn Michaels and Diesel and the Click because they felt like they were on the rising up, and then they got their legs chopped out because of someone saying, "Oh well, they shouldn't be with me. I should be with my best friend Diesel or be with my best friend Shawn Michaels." So then suddenly the wrestlers who were moving up the ranks, I know Bam Bam Bigelow for one, was someone who was like, well, I'm moving up. I fought Lawrence Taylor at WrestleMania. I'm moving up, but yet he got pushed down because of influence. Politics is a big play in wrestling always. So obviously, with you, your character not standing up for yourself when you felt like it was too late might have been a problem. But at the time when you came in, I thought everything was still going great with you and very
Yeah, it was a
family
blast. I
friendly.
mean, yeah, I was on cloud nine, man. I was loving it. It was, great. The deal with Jerry Lawler started, and I thought that was great. But then it kind of ended. It kind of got cut short and didn't even end with a singles pay-per-view match against Jerry Lawler, which was kind of, I remember just thinking, I think it was maybe a SummerSlam or something that came up right during that same time, and they put Jerry Lawler with Roddy Piper, and Piper hadn't been there in ages, and they just kind of brought Piper in to wrestle him, and I was like, why are they having him wrestle Piper when I'm in the middle of a feud with him? And that was kind of my first glance at how things worked. But as far as the Click and all those guys, yeah, I mean they had a lot of heat, but I kind of understood what they were, and yeah, there were times when he would get his friends over or pushes or being, I remember a shoot interview with Bret Hart talking about how Shawn Michaels talked about how once he was champion, he was going to work with Diesel and Razor Ramon and
1, 2, 3 kid.
1, 2, 3 Kid and even maybe Hunter. And
Yeah,
he was like, you're not even giving anybody else a chance to work with you to get in on that championship run or whatever. But I never expected him to work with me, of course, because I was a babyface and he was just turning babyface, at that point in time for his championship run. So I didn't foresee anything like that, And that was another thing. I didn't politic with the other wrestlers enough to try and wrestle them. I just, like I said, I left it up to the office, and that was a mistake. You can't do that. You got to get in there and talk to guys like Undertaker and Bret Hart and say, look, and have an idea of a way that you could work with them that would be appealing to them. And I didn't have any of that at the time.
was it a situation of you're just happy to be there, and then once that the I guess the lights have dimmed a little bit, no longer is it bright and shiny, everything, you're like, okay, well, I've been here for a while now, and maybe I'm not just happy to be here. Maybe I want something more.
Yeah, yeah, because and where I came from in Florida, at that time I was probably the best locally where I was wrestling, and I expected to go up there and they were going to see all the great things I could do, and then I was going to be a big star up there. And man, once you get into that grind, it's a different world, man, and you've got to find your way real quick,
Of
and
course.
it can be difficult. It's tough. It's grueling for sure.
Yeah, it's in today's world, it's still grueling. You still hear stories about exactly what you're discussing in today's world. But you mentioned Jerry Lawler, though. There was a segment with you and Jerry Lawler where you have a trash can. This is 1994, and he hits you with your trash can. Now, this is before we get to the Attitude Era, and we have steel chair shots straight to the head, and ladders and tables, and ECW hasn't even become a thing really yet. There was backlash to being on TV for Jerry Lawler hitting you in the head with a trash can, and he actually had to apologize on TV for that. And now, interesting enough, you brought up Roddy Piper. That was at King of the Ring '94, where out of nowhere, Roddy Piper comes in. And he had no muscle mass either. He had no muscles. He was like, "I'm a very skinny man," and he was very skinny, just like me. And I love Roddy Piper. No disrespect, but that was a little awkward that moment. Leading it, why have a storyline being built with you and Jerry, but not have a pay-per-view match between you two? Now, do you remember there being backlash over this? This is a trash can shot to the head.
It definitely changed things because when it happened, we just kind of we did it. It was live TV, and we just asked like one agent that we knew would say yes. It was Jack Lanza, and he was like, "Go ahead and just do it." And so when we went out and did it, they freaked out. They really freaked out about it. And when I got in the back, I remember Shane McMahon came running up to me and he goes, "What happened?" And I was like, "What happened?" I was like, we just wanted to spice it up and make it, give it some heat. And they were acting like it was a negative thing, and then they had Gorilla Monsoon and Macho Man come back on immediately and apologize for it, and then they did that stupid skit with Lawler on the show the next weekend on Superstars, where he was apologizing, and
Yeah.
it was just like I remember sitting home watching that, going, "This isn't really good. This doesn't help the angle. It doesn't make it, this doesn't make it fire it up and give it more heat." Um, but I never really said anything. I said, they know what they're doing or whatever. But yeah, it was, and it's interesting because we got so much flack about doing that garbage can spot, but they had just had WrestleMania 10 where these guys beat the hell out of each other with a ladder.
Right.
It's kind of, you look for logic in some of these situations. In the professional wrestling business, a lot of times there is no logical reasoning. They just say things to say them. And, if you're not the guy that's supposed to be in the middle of something big, they don't, sometimes they would try to control that. And, it took a lot for me to realize those things, but that's kind of how it went down.
Interesting you say that because yeah, there have been stories of say Triple H and Shawn Michaels said to The Rock, that eyebrow thing you're doing, pff, that's stupid. You shouldn't do that. And obviously what they were doing was, hey, he's getting popular with this eyebrow thing. Let's shut it down before he steals our spot and takes our money. And the same thing, obviously, you brought up a really good example too. I love it. You brought up the ladder match at Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon, crushing each other, falling off it, jumping off of it. Yet you're using a trash can, and I guess both items are household items, but a trash can is easier accessible to a small child than it is a giant ladder. So they're going to try to use that logic on you, be like, well, what if a child does this? Yeah, but you just smashed each other over the back with ladders. That's different. Like, is it?
Yeah, that's that logic I'm telling you about. That's it. Sometimes it was ridiculous. I would just sit there and kind of scratch my head, like, okay, but no, it doesn't make sense. But okay,
No,
you know.
yeah, no, it doesn't make sense. But I love your example because it's perfect because it's exactly what someone was probably thinking. Be like, he can't do that. That's stealing from whatever we're doing tonight, and I don't like this. It ruins
There
me.
was a lot of that going on. I remember me and Pierre, the Quebecer Pierre, who's now PCO. Man,
Yeah,
we would be on many house shows together in the first or second match of the night, and we would go out there and just fly all over the place and beat the hell out of each other. And I remember guys like the Undertaker and Shawn Michaels and them getting pissed off about what we were doing because they had to go out for main event, and they're like, we can't follow that. It's like, well, maybe you got to step up your game.
right.
And that there's a whole nother bunch of heat I put on myself. But I would say shit like that to them. I'd be like, look, man, I'm just trying to get over and make some money here and improve my position. So I'm gonna go out there and do everything I can. Uh, you know, and they didn't like it. They didn't like my answer many times. They didn't like whatever answers I gave them for situations. But I really didn't care. I just spoke, the way I felt. And sometimes that could get you in trouble in the wrestling business.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with wrestlers like The Undertaker or Shawn Michaels or people like that, they are going to go out there and do their shtick. Well, their shtick is the same kind of rhythm. If you've ever watched a Ric Flair match, you've seen every Ric Flair match, but they all have drama, but they're beat by beat kind of the same thing. But yet, if you're going out there with PCO, Jean Pierre Lafitte, going out there and killing each other in the ring, well, they're probably angry, which makes no sense because it's not on TV. You know what I mean? Like if it was Raw or a pay per view and you did that on your own without telling anybody, sure, maybe I'd be a little upset. But it's a house show. You know what I mean? Like who's gonna see that except for the town that's there?
Yeah, that just, but it definitely got me heat. Yeah, I remember sitting in a cab one time with Undertaker and well, Godfather. He was Kama, the fighting machine or whatever, the
Yeah.
ultimate fighting machine back in those days. But we were in England and maybe London or something in one of those big old taxi cabs, and I just remember getting in there and going, man, it's brutal being in there with Pierre, man. He wants me to fly all over the place, and I did that for a reason. I did it on purpose to
Of
see.
course.
And Undertaker was like, "Yeah, you're doing too much." And I thought it was interesting. It took me saying that to get him to say anything. And I said, "Look, in the future, if you have issue with something I'm doing in this company, in the ring or out of the ring or anything, I would prefer if you come to me and discuss it with me." And they both looked at me like they couldn't believe I was saying that, like talking to them like that. But it was like, my point was, I had already heard through the grapevine that they were pissed. And I went, I made them basically, by doing that, it made them kind of show their cards. And I said, look, if you're going to have a problem with something I'm doing, you need to come talk to me about it. All this running around behind people's backs and shit, it's just nonsense.
I
So, and I was always cool with Taker. I mean, after that, and I was always cool. I'm still cool with, Charles Godfather, man. He's awesome. Um, but yeah, like I said, I always kind of spoke my mind and just, I just let the chips fall where they may as far as professionally and politics. I really didn't care. And that's probably part of the reason I didn't last very long. It was maybe 2.5 years up there.
Yeah, with Undertaker though, after that situation, did you guys have a different relationship? Like, did you have conversations? Because I know, at least I believe you rode with Bret Hart, right?
Yeah, for a while I was riding with Bret Hart, just to kind of try to sit under the learning tree, as they say, and learn as much as I could. But I was always open to listening to people, and me and Taker were always cool. I was really kind of cool with everybody, um, maybe to a fault. I remember Shawn Michaels had this saying: "In this business, you can make friends or you can make money." And it was an interesting thing to say because it's kind of true if you think about it, with the politics of the wrestling business. And I was trying to be friends with everybody. I always tried to get along with everybody, and also I always wanted to have fun. I was having a blast, and I was always the first guy at the bar, and the guy with the hangover trying to do my promo pics at TV the next day, hungover as hell, and I just wanted to have fun, and maybe that was one of my shortcomings. I didn't know when it was time to be business and handle my business better. So, but live and you learn.
Hey, I love you, and everyone still loves Duke the Dumpster Droese. So whatever person had a problem with you, that's up to them. But the wrestling world will always remember the memories you created in our minds. So always, at least remember that. I want you to remember that.
I
You were,
appreciate that.
of course, dude. You're Duke the Dumpster Droese. Never forget that. All right,
Right,
because again,
right on.
memories forever. You competed in the shortest Royal Rumble of all time, 1995, but the winner of that got to have Pamela Anderson walk him to the ring at WrestleMania. Now she's backstage at this Royal Rumble. This is 1995. Pam Anderson is the hottest thing in the world. There is no internet yet. There is no downloading pictures and looking at porn on your phone. No, it doesn't exist.
No
This is
cell
Pam
phones either.
Anderson. What was
Yeah.
the atmosphere backstage? Is she being protected? Is there security? Are there cops?
Um, you know, she didn't like mingle with the boys very much. She was wherever her dressing room that was, that's where she kind of stayed. She was very nice, but I mean, nobody really, we didn't get to go. Yeah, I think they kept us separated on purpose. But I'll tell you who was really cool was Jenny McCarthy, man, at
Oh yeah.
WrestleMania. Jenny McCarthy was so awesome, such a nice person. She was so into it. But yeah, at that Royal Rumble, uh, yeah, we didn't really see much of Pam. Her and I think she was with Tommy at the time. Yeah, I'm sure it was
Oh
Tommy Lee,
yeah.
and they just kind of rolled in there and rolled back out of there.
Made sense. It makes sense because I know that the history of those two. Tommy was very protective of her, and if you got a bunch of muscly clad men wearing barely anything as well, looking better than him,
Yeah,
probably some competition there.
yeah,
There are rumors him and Shawn Michaels got at it once, but we don't know if that's true or not. So all in all, but Jay McCarthy, she was on Singled Out on MTV at the time. So she was, you saying at WrestleMania 11, she was very friendly and open to conversations with the boys.
yep, yeah, very much so. Absolutely, She was
Nice.
cool.
I know Jonathan Taylor Thomas, little boy from Home Improvement, was there that night. Nick Notoris, I believe, from NYPD Blues.
Yeah, those guys were all very cool, very, very kind of outgoing. They were out there in the open, and they'd meet and they'd shake your hand and say
Oh,
hello, and
nice.
they'd look you in the eye. You can tell sometimes. I mean, there's wrestlers that would do it too, but they're there, but they're not really there when you're talking to them or you're introducing yourself to them. And sometimes celebrities can be that way. There were definitely times where celebrities thought they were above the wrestling business and stuff like that. But yeah, some of those guys, Turturro was real cool, really cool, and Taylor Thomas was cool too.
I think Burt Reynolds was also at that WrestleMania, if I remember. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
I don't remember because
there's so many celebrities involved.
yeah, he
Sometimes
was
you
definitely
forget.
somebody I never met. I
Yeah,
didn't, I didn't see him around.
he might have been at 10 actually. That was in Madison Square Garden. 11 was at the Hartford Civic Center.
Something like that.
So something like that.
You
Yeah.
remember better than me.
it's too.
Wow.
It's all in my brain. I probably could go. I might be able to go through them all, but we're not here to talk about WrestleMania. Talk about you, though. In 1996, you did have a rivalry with Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H, as we know in today's world. And was there any problems with that involving, and we mentioned the Click earlier, with the Click? Because, again, heading into this, it seemed like Triple H was fighting, he fought Henry O. Godwin, which I love that name, Hog. Get it? Hog. Um, and then he moves on to you. Like, was there ever an issue with the competition he was taking on, especially yourself?
No, there was never an issue because I knew I wasn't going to beat him because he was already in the clique. And, you know, I used to call those guys the protected species. You weren't going to beat them. And I told Vince when we came up with this idea for me to work with him, I said, I know I'm not going to beat him. And I said, but and we did when they had the idea because I wanted to turn heel and I wanted to cut my hair and change my appearance and turn heel. And when I said that, it was like Jim Ross kind of jumped out of his chair and said, "Well, how about if we use the hair cutting as part of the angle in this thing or something?" When Triple H eventually cut my hair on Superstars, and I said, "Look, that's fine, and I'll do it. I have no problem doing that at all, as long as somewhere down the line I get some kind of revenge. I know I'm not going to beat him. I know I'm not going to cut his hair, but somehow we come up with a way for me to get revenge. And then also in the end, of course, full circle, I want to turn heel." And there, of course, one of many times Vince McMahon would go, "Of course, absolutely. We're going to do it. Well, let's do it," he'd say. And half the time that shit wouldn't materialize.
Well,
But that's how it came about.
technically, didn't you did beat him at the 1996 Royal Rumble free for all, and you were number 30 in the Royal Rumble, and he was number one. But that was, I guess, a storyline mechanism to get Triple H to be number one and last the entire time.
Yeah, basically, it was to make him stronger. If you look at it, he hits me with brass knucks and gets disqualified when the acting president at the time, Gorilla Monsoon, came out and reversed the decision. So people always say, "You were the first guy to beat him." I said, "Yeah, I beat him by disqualification." I mean, it's like
Right.
Duke the Dumpster never pinned anybody that was a star in the WWF. But they did it to get to that angle. And it was always interesting to me because the big blow off was that in your house match. And in the end of the in your house match, he hits me in the face with my own garbage can lid and pins me. And I just remember when they were telling me the finish, I was just thinking, why wouldn't Gorilla Monsoon come out for that one too and reverse it?
Adding logic to an illogical situation, huh?
Exactly. And it didn't matter.
That's so
It's
funny.
like, this is the way because this is the way we want to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I've been watching wrestling at least since 1992, never stopping once. And there's always those moments you're discussing of like, wait a minute. So why did this time the president came out and saw the brass knucks, but this time when he's watching the TV, he doesn't see a gigantic trash can top?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, that's it led to my frustration at the time, which ultimately would culminate with me leaving the WWF. I, I I was saying I was wanting to go home, and then they told me to go home, and it all just kind of came crashing down in one instance in 1996. But yeah, I mean, I was just getting frustrated at that point, and yeah, that's kind of how it went down.
So y- you said, because obviously this is a different time. Now they work like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. They have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off. Not the case when you're wrestling. You were wrestling, I'm guessing 6 days a week, maybe twice on Sunday. Like what's the grueling schedule that you're dealing with? What was your actual schedule?
Sometimes we go 2 weeks or 3 weeks straight, and then go home for 2 or 3 days. Oftentimes there was runs that were definitely 2 weeks long. We do a loop somewhere, like we'd fly into Newark, New Jersey, and do the New York cities, and then a couple of, like Philadelphia and Scranton and all those, and come back around to Newark again, fly out and not go home, go to another centralized city and do a loop there, get the rental cars and drive around there and do a bunch of house shows. And then sometimes they would plant 3 days of TV in the middle of there somewhere, so we really wouldn't go home. And then finally we'd get to go home for 2 days or 3 days, just long enough to get your laundry done and maybe take a nap. That's what I would say. Of course, not me. I'd go home and keep partying because I wasn't married and I didn't have kids. So I was living the rock star life on the road and at home, unfortunately.
I was gonna ask you that because I've now talked to many wrestlers of coming home and being like, you want to hang out with your kids or your wife, and then you are on the couch and just like half
Yeah.
asleep, and they're like, "Oh, Daddy, throw the ball with me, play dolls," and you're like, "I can't even move, like
Yeah.
my body," and you're at a different situation altogether. So I guess positive coming home and not having to deal with someone poking you in the face, going, "Play with me, Daddy," but at the same time,
You're
a lot of
wore
wrestlers
out.
have
It's still
suffered.
brutal.
Yeah. And so you told them you wanted to go home, and they said, "Well, then go home." And so what does that mean? They fired you?
Yeah, they sent me home in the middle of a contract. Basically what was happening is when I re-signed the 1 year deal and got that feud with Triple H. That's why they gave it to me, to keep me and re-sign me for the extra year rollover. But as soon as I signed it, they did the deal. We did the deal with Triple H, and they immediately had him do a 20-second job to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 12, and also immediately put him with Mark Marrow. And I just went back to losing to all the new heels that came in.
Hmm.
The only difference now is I had shorter hair and I was still a baby face. And so I was getting frustrated, and periodically I'd have these little powwow sessions with me and Vince McMahon and Jerry Briscoe standing out in a hallway somewhere, and I would express my disgust, with how they were using me. And I remember a couple times I said, if you're not going to use me any better, this is the shit I said to Vince McMahon. I said, if you're not going to use me any better than this, just send me home. And I remember he would always be like, he would pause for a second, like he couldn't believe I said that shit to him. And believe me, I was not in the right frame of mind. At that point, I was using drugs. I was injured. My back was hurt. I started doing tons of painkillers. And like I said, I was always the first guy at the bar. And I was just erratic in my
Hmm.
behavior. And I was really frustrated. And I felt like I was ready to just leave. And then one day he just, actually, what he said first was he was going to send me to Memphis to develop as a heel. And he was going to pay me $1,000 a week, which the hilarious thing is that was a lot more money than they were paying me at the time because they had me off the road most of the time, and I wasn't really booked. And but I think my response is what got me sent home. I said I'm going to need that in writing, and it looked like Vince bit a turd. He just kind of looked at me like, absolutely. But then, like a week later, Jerry Briscoe's walking up to me in the locker room saying, "Nah, Vince said you can go on home." And I just remember going, "It's over." Can't
Wow.
believe it. Yeah. So that's
That's
how it kind of went down in a nutshell.
but are you still under contract when they send you home, or they like
They
this
sent
put
me
you?
home. I just signed that year, so I think I had like 6 or 8 months left on that contract. A contract of nothing. I mean, it's like
Oh, the
10.
guaranteed of you have to work for us.
Basically, it was you were an independent contractor, and all they guaranteed you each year was 10 matches at $150 each. And I had already reached that. I had gotten past the $1,500 mark at that point. But yeah, so they sent me home, and I basically couldn't work for anybody else until the contract was up. And it didn't matter anyway, man. I went home to a shitstorm of drugs and alcohol anyway, and just drowned myself in that, whirlwind of shit and for a while. And yeah, that's how it kind of went down. There was a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics in the wrestling business, but at least when you were on the road, it was a controlled environment. They were pointing you and telling you where do you need to be here at this time, you need to be there at this time, you need to be. Once I went home and I wasn't booked anymore, there wasn't anybody telling me where to be or when. It went off the rails real quick. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it fell apart.
Interesting. Now, do you find that when you went home that a lot of wrestlers have the same situation with you is once they're off the road, well, there is no more road. So there's only the other parts of the road left. And that's you went home and you were living the rock star life, but in your house.
Yeah, and I didn't have any money or anything to show for it, so I was pretty much broke almost immediately. And I had this hefty drug problem, so I had to figure out, ways and means to get money and get drugs. And I started bouncing in strip clubs and shit like that. It was just ridiculous. And yeah, it was just bad. It was bad for a while, several years.
So when you're working at the WWF, you don't have to tell me exact numbers, but like so let's go with 94 to 90 to like 96. What do you throw out a ballpark number? What is coming into your wallet? Are you spending it on the road, or are you pocketing some of this and hoping in like not going and buying Lamborghinis?
I I couldn't afford Lamborghinis if I
Okay.
wanted to, but I was not saving money. Um, you know, I think the first couple years I barely broke even with we paid our own road expenses. And remember, we were independent contractors, so
Yes.
we filled out a 1099 at the end of the year, and we got to claim, our rental cars and hotels and food and stuff like that. Anything we spent pretty much on the road as expenses, we got to take, right off of our taxes. But still, even that being said, I really made almost no money.
Wow.
Vince knew when he had somebody that he could starve, and he knew, you know, like I said, I was a mark walking in the door. Well, he saw me 10 miles away coming, and I think that influenced how he paid me in those first couple of years. But plus, I think they're going to test you for the first 2 or 3 years anyway, and they're going to kind of starve you and see how your attitude is, and make you work for it. And unfortunately, I think some of those tests I failed in the end, but uh, it wasn't. Times were lean then anyway. Money was way down for most everybody. Like I said, there was the haves and the have-nots, and I definitely wasn't on the big money list. There was a lot of us workhorses on the undercard that would, on a nightly basis, kill ourselves for scraps, basically.
Wow. Most likely because they're thinking, hey, he's a wrestling fan. He's in the WWF, the number one company in the world. He's gonna be there. But obviously, eventually, like a lot of wrestlers, they get cut. And once they get cut, that lifestyle that they were living is still intact, but the wrestling world is no longer there, unfortunately, for a lot of people. So yeah, July 13th, 1996 was your last match in the WWF. You took on TL Hopper, Garbage Man versus Toilet Man. So you know, I gotta say, I've always enjoyed both characters, but obviously yours a lot more than the sounds of a toilet flushing was his music. toilet,
Yeah,
flush
that
it.
was symbolic of my career at the time. And I
Oh,
remember I was such a beaten, professionally, I was such a beaten person. I was beaten down and I was just sick of it and ready to go. And I remember Tony Anthony, TL Hopper, came up to me before our match. And of course, I was doing a job for him. And he goes, "Would it be okay if I stuck the plunger in your mouth?" And now I don't know how many guys would have agreed to that. But I just, at that point, just remember going, what the hell else could they do to me at this point? Just go ahead, man. I was just like, why not? Add insult to injury. Why not? And that's kind of how I went out. Yeah, with
oh,
a finger in my mouth.
wow. What an image for your last day on the job. But yet that's not the last day, because WrestleMania 17 came around and they had the gimmick battle royal, and you returned along with people like Tugboat and Jim Cornette, and there were so many other great characters in there. And now, how did that come to be? Because WrestleMania 17 is looked at as the greatest WrestleMania of all time by a lot of wrestling fans and a lot of people in the media. And you're on that card in this gimmick battle royal with the gobbledygooker as well. So what was
Yeah,
that
so I got
situation
that.
like?
Yeah, so I got that going for me. But it's interesting. At the time, I was down in Miami, and I was kind of working with an independent promotion, and I was still on drugs. I was really bad off, and I remember somebody telling me about this thing they were doing, this gimmick battle royal, and they told me I needed to get in touch with somebody. So I had, I think I had Bruce's office number somewhere, and I called him, and he got me booked for it. And I was in no condition to wrestle any way, shape, or form. But it was just a battle royal where you walk around and punch and kick each other until it's time for you to go out of the ring. So that was easy enough, and it was great. But I was just kind of embarrassed at the state I was in, so I kind of stayed away from most everybody most of the time. I mean, I said hi briefly to Steve Austin because we were friends when I was there, and um, I said hi to a couple of people, but other than that, I just kind of hid off in the corner until it was time for me to go out there. But I'm glad I got to be a part of that because it is the best WrestleMania, and there was several great matches on that. Of course, we had to follow the damn TLC match. I remember standing by the gorilla position watching that thing go down live, and I was like, holy crap, this is insane.
Yeah.
So much for hitting somebody in the head with a garbage can.
I
So,
know. Can you imagine, like 5 years, 6 years before that, they made a big deal out of that moment? Like, oh
yeah,
no, we gotta
it was
apologize. We gotta
too violent.
apologize. And then here we are in today's world, like, okay, we'll stack 4 tables on top of each other. You grab the 20-foot ladder. No, no, no. The
Light you on
30, no,
fire
the
or whatever.
30-foot
Who knows?
ladder. You're gonna do a front flip off of it onto 2 people who are on top of the table. But that trash can spot, too much.
Yeah.
Too much. I guess the evolution of wrestling will always change how people look at certain things. But all I have to say is I will always love and respect you and Duke the Dumpster Droese, the character himself, because you created memories that will last a lifetime in my brain and many wrestling fans who grew up not with the Hogans, but with the Dukes of Dumpsters, the Henry Godwins, the Phineas Godwins, the Mantars, the Giant Gonzaleses. Those are the memories. Yeah, Shawn Michaels, that's great and all. I used to dance around like him too. But you know what was fun? Hitting my sister with a trash can. That was
There
fun.
you go.
So, I mean, I didn't have to do that. I can't
Well,
get
I
in
really
trouble.
appreciate it, man. I appreciate the kind words. And it was
Again,
fun, man. I used to the one people always ask me, "What was it like being there?" And I always say the same thing. I go, you know, in the back, the politics, not so much fun. But every night when I got to walk out through that curtain into a crowd and get in the ring and perform, there's nothing like it. I mean, that's the best drug in the world. And you know, to that, I always loved the interaction with the fans. And so yeah, man, I always appreciate hearing, something like that from you and others. I really appreciate the appreciation of what I did. So thank you.
course. Of course, because again, I don't want anyone or even yourself to think that anyone has ever forgotten about you or your character, the things you've done. Trust me, everyone who's been watching wrestling since that time and now know the bullshit that was going on backstage between everybody involved. And
Yeah,
guess who's in charge now? Hmm? Huh?
Triple H.
There you go. So the people, they were politicking in
He,
'94, and now they run the company in
he definitely
2023.
played the game properly, that's for sure.
Ah, it doesn't hurt marrying the boss's daughter either. But in reality, I love him and I love wrestling and I love you and I love
Yeah,
everything you contributed to the wrestling world. So I want to say it's been a pleasure to talk to you today about the ups and downs of professional wrestling because it's like a roller coaster. Sometimes it has to end, but the ride was amazing. So thank you again,
absolutely.
Duke the Dumpster Droese, for being here on 10 Count. I've been Steve Fall. He's Duke the Dumpster Droese. Go hit some of the trash can. Please don't, or you can if you want to. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Yeah.